Hey. Time for the Out of This World story from rSpace. They say you never really know someone until you watch mall security footage of them sneaking off to a stranger's truck for a little midday extracurricular activity. Wait, did they actually say that? Today on rSpace, that kind of motherly instincts that make CPS shudder. Wife let her son in the car while she hooked up with her affair partner. I made sure she lost custody. I'm so mad right now that I'm actually shaking while typing this. As a father, I've always tried to put my son first, and I assumed my wife would always do the same. Instead, she put him in harm's way just so she could run off and have a little fun. I, 33 male, was over at my friend Ben's place, helping him out with a woodworking project. I love working with my hands, but my job keeps me behind a desk all day. So when he told me he was building a shade for his porch, I jumped at the chance to get my hands dirty and build something. My wife, Linda, 31 female, even encouraged me. She knows I like building things and said she'd just hang around at home and probably run some errands. That left her and our son, Eric, 4 male, alone at home. Eric is a sweet kid, kind and funny, and I love him more than anything in the world. He wasn't happy to see me go. Most parents would duck around this fact, but I'll admit that Eric liked me more than his mom. She wasn't sure why, but it was pretty obvious to me. I paid more attention to him than she did. I'm a physically active guy, and I always was down to run around and play with him. She was more reserved with him than I was. I explained it away as her not knowing how to play with him because he was a boy. At least she never actually neglected him. That opinion lasted until I got a call that afternoon. I let it ring the first time because I was using a drill and I didn't want to set it down. Besides, I glanced at the phone and didn't recognize the number. If it was important, they'd call again. Well, it rang again. I put the drill down and picked up the phone. I was a little annoyed at being interrupted, but my mood changed completely when I heard the voice on the other line. It was a man's voice. He said my name and asked if I was Eric's dad. I almost went into full-blown panic and started thinking the worst. That type of phone call is almost always followed by bad news. I said I was and asked if Eric was okay. My voice was shaky and Ben dropped his tools and almost ran to my side when he heard me. The man on the other end tried to reassure me. He said Eric was fine and I didn't need to worry. He explained that he worked with mall security and a shopper had found Eric sitting alone in the car. The engine was running and the AC was on, but Eric was crying his eyes out. The concerned shopper had raised a fuss until the mall security was alerted. Eric had told them that he came with his mom and he gave them my number. That's when they called me. I gave Ben a hasty explanation as I ran to my car, and he didn't hesitate to get into the driver's seat. He told me there was no way he was going to let me go alone or even drive in my condition. I told him that he didn't need to worry, since Eric was safe, but he insisted. I appreciated that later on, since it was helpful to have a cooler head around. When we got to the mall, we were directed to the security office. I saw Eric sitting in a corner of the office, sipping from a juice box they'd given him. He was a little calm by that point, though he seemed shy around all the strangers. His eyes were puffy, and his face was still a little red. It was obvious he'd been crying, and it hurt so much. The moment he saw me, his face lit up and he ran into my arms. I scooped him up and hugged him close. Everyone gave us a moment together, and then the security officer stepped in. He said Eric was a smart kid. When they'd asked him if he knew his parents' phone numbers, he'd sung a song with my name, address, and phone number. I couldn't believe it. I'd made up a song with all the emergency info he needed to know, and I had to memorize it as soon as he was old enough to sing it back to me. I'd taught it to him in case he ever got lost. I never thought he would need it because his mom left him in a running car on his own. Speaking of Linda, I tried calling her several times while we were driving down to the mall, and she never picked up. I was starting to get worried, not just because she'd left Eric in a car on his own, but because something might have happened to her. After all, we couldn't reach her, and nobody knew where she was. The security guy told me that they had made several announcements over the PA asking her to come and pick him up from the security room. Eric had told them that she told him that she was coming in to get some stuff. If she was truly in the mall, then she would have heard those announcements. My blood felt like ice cream in my veins, and I started imagining a bunch of worst-case scenarios. I was just considering getting the police involved when she finally answered one of my calls. Before I got a chance to say anything, she said, "Hi, babe." Her voice was light and breezy, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I was still too worried about her to really think about what that could mean. When I asked her where she was, she said she was at the mall with Eric. That was when I started to get angry. I was sure she was okay now, and it was starting to sound like she'd left Eric in the car on purpose. I asked her if Eric was with her at the moment. She laughed at first, and it sounded like she was about to say, "Of course." But then she suddenly cut herself off and asked me why. I told her that I was at the mall with Eric, where he'd been left in a running car. She asked where we were, and I told her how to get to the security office. A few minutes later, she ran inside. By then, I was boiling. The first thing I said was, "Where were you?" She seemed completely panicked and stuttered that she was in the mall. She claimed that she just wanted to dip in for a minute, and she left the AC and Eric's music on. I started screaming that it wasn't an excuse. She tried to take Eric from me, but I wasn't going to let him go. He didn't seem to want to go over to her either. Ben patted my arm and told me that I was scaring Eric. Then he took Eric's hand and asked him if he wanted to get some ice cream. Before he left, he shot my wife a look and muttered something under his breath. I was glad to have Ben around because he was right. I was mad at Linda, and I'd forgotten that it would do Eric any good to see his dad yelling at his mom. But when Ben and Eric were out of hearing range, I turned my full attention to Linda. I asked what she was thinking when she left our son in a car on his own. There were all sorts of crazies wandering around these days. Anything could have happened. She insisted that she only wanted to get into the mall for a minute, but that was an obvious lie. Close to an hour had passed between when the security called me and when she'd actually shown up. It was obvious that she'd been away much longer than that. Then there was the fact that she wasn't even in the mall at all. They told me that they'd made several announcements over the mall's PA system. If she really was in the mall, she would have heard him and come running. Linda stuck to her lie. She claimed she was just in the mall getting some stuff. The other people in the security room looked around awkwardly. I knew what they were thinking. I was thinking it myself. Linda was obviously lying to me, and everybody there knew she was probably with another man. I mean, look at the facts. She left our son in a car on his own. She said she wanted to grab something quickly, but she disappeared for an hour. She hadn't responded to any of the announcements that mentioned her and Eric by name. She hadn't answered any of my numerous phone calls either, but she was still keeping up the narrative that she'd just been running a quick errand. Yet when I asked her to, she couldn't produce a receipt or the items that she'd supposedly gone to buy. When I asked her which store she'd gone to, she couldn't give me a name. She said it was one of the kiosks in the mall, and they didn't give her a receipt. But I wasn't satisfied. I asked what she bought and where it was. She couldn't answer that. I'd heard enough. I thanked the security guards for the help, and I exchanged contact information. I wanted to make sure I could get in touch with them in case I needed a copy of the incident report later. I left the mall with Ben and Eric, and I didn't give Linda another look. We went straight to Ben's house. I didn't want to be around Linda, and there was no way I was going to leave Eric alone with her after what had happened. Linda called when she realized I wasn't coming home, and she asked me to bring Eric so we could talk. I told her that there was nothing to talk about unless she was prepared to tell me the truth. I let her know that I was at Ben's house and Eric would be sleeping over there with me for one night at least. We might come back in the morning, but for now, we needed to be away from her. She said I was overreacting and insisted that I couldn't keep Eric away from her. She told me that she could come down in person to pick him up if she had to. She even threatened to get the police involved. I told her to go ahead, that they'd love to hear about the child neglect she'd performed earlier. That got her to calm down. She just asked if I was sure we'd be able to talk the next day. I said we would. I'm still not entirely sure what she ran off to do, but I know I'm going to get to the bottom of it. And if she really ran off to meet up with another man, I'll make sure she regrets it. She put my son in danger, and that's something I'll never take lightly. That's not just a parenting slip-up. That's straight up dangerous. Leaving a 4-year-old in a running car alone while she goes off and does what exactly? That's never okay. Ever. I don't blame you one bit for taking Eric and getting the heck out of there. That wasn't overreacting. That was protecting your son. It seems I wasn't alone in suspecting that she was meeting up with a man. She refused to admit it, though. Over the next few days, she insisted that I bring Eric home, and she became more and more aggressive. At one point, she said she would tell the police that I had kidnapped him, and that she would tell them that I was lying about the parking lot incident. That worried me. She was starting to sound crazy enough to do it, and as a man, the authorities weren't likely to believe me without the hard evidence. I knew I could count on the mall security to back up my side of the story, but a lot could happen before I had a chance to get in touch with them. One of the most popular comments I got was that I should ask the mall for the parking lot security footage. That was the first thing I thought of, too, and her threat made me take that idea more seriously. I'd talked to my lawyer, and we filed a request for the footage in writing. At first, they told me it was against policy, but when we insisted that this was required for a lawsuit, they changed their mind. I wasn't prepared for how angry the footage would make me. There were clips from multiple cameras at different times. First, the footage showed her driving in and parking her car. She got down from the car and walked away, leaving Eric inside. I was enraged watching it. The footage wasn't clear, and I couldn't see Eric's face, but I could see signs of his movement through the window. I could only imagine how scared and confused he was watching the person he was supposed to be trusting walk away from him. Then came the part that sealed everything. She didn't walk into the mall. Instead, she got on her phone and walked to another part of the parking lot. I couldn't tell the exact distance because the footage kept cutting across different cameras, but I could tell that it was pretty far away. If I had to guess, I'd say she went to the other side of the lot. Then she walked up to a truck with tinted windows and got in, but the car didn't drive away. It just sat there idling. There was about 45 minutes of footage of the car sitting still. It was impossible to make anything out through the tinted windows, but from the slight rocking motion of the car, it was pretty obvious what was going on. It was a slight motion on the camera, but it was undeniable. I felt sick. I'd been watching the footage with Ben, and he just said, "Jesus, Linda." He said it wasn't good for me to watch that part, and that I should just skip forward. I had to agree with him. I felt nauseous watching the car shake. That nausea was replaced with anger when I realized what that meant. She'd driven my son to a parking lot and abandoned him there to meet up with an affair partner, to have sex with some guy in his car like a cheap slut. It was unbelievable. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up replaying the footage and taking notes on all the timestamps of note. I also took down the license plate of the guy's truck. In the morning, I gave everything to my lawyer. I wanted to file for custody immediately. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This is about careless endangerment of a child. My child. She left my child in a parking lot where anything could have happened to him just to get plowed in the back seat of some guy's car. It was disgusting. The infidelity aspect of it couldn't be ignored either. As soon as I was done talking to the family lawyer, I started looking for a divorce lawyer. Ever since the incident, I'd been suspecting that our marriage might come to an end. Now I was certain. There was no coming back from this. I didn't call Linda, and I didn't answer any of her calls. My lawyer wasted no time filing for an emergency custody hearing using the footage as evidence. We also got statements from the mall security staff and Ben as a witness. The court moved fast. In less than 72 hours, I had temporary full custody of Eric until a formal hearing was conducted. I haven't heard anything from Linda since then. I don't know if she's still going to call and threaten, or if her lawyer has advised her to keep a level head. Either way, with Eric safely under my legal protection, I can start taking the necessary steps to make sure he stays protected. Update 2. I thought my last update was a wild one, with me discovering that my wife had abandoned my child in a parking lot for some backseat action. It turns out that things were only about to get worse. First of all, we managed to find out who the guy that she'd been sleeping with was. Honestly, it wasn't important. He was just some local guy, Jake, who worked at a bank. My lawyer told me that there was no point in involving him in the lawsuit if he didn't know anything about her leaving Eric in the car. I wasn't happy because I wanted him to pay too, but the more important person to deal with was Linda. She was ready to make herself a problem, considering she came up to Ben's door one day, yelling and screaming. She accused me of making up an affair to justify stealing Eric from her. She sounded insane. We told her that we were ready to call the police if she didn't leave. She didn't care. I told her that we had video evidence of her affair. She'd left her son alone in the car to go meet Jake. She froze for a moment. Then she started with the lies. She said she'd only gone to meet up with him to talk about a job offer. I laughed. I told her that I thought she'd been shopping at the kiosk. Then I asked her what kind of discussion takes place for 45 minutes in a locked car that's rocking. She didn't say anything for a while. She just insisted that Eric was safe in the car and that she'd had an eye on her car from the other car the whole time. Right, and that was why she didn't notice when a small crowd of people took him out of her car and brought him into the mall. He could have been abducted, and she wouldn't have noticed a thing. It must have been one intense discussion they were having. She kept insisting that she'd just gone to meet Jake for a discussion. When I asked her if she was willing to testify to that during the custody hearing, she went quiet. She said there was no need for a custody hearing or a divorce, and we could talk things through like adults. I told her she'd lost the chance for a reasonable discussion ever since she put my son in danger. She eventually left before the police arrived. We reported everything that had happened to them. I wanted to make sure it was on record that she'd come by trying to take Eric. The divorce is still ongoing, and honestly, I don't care how it goes. I'm not sparing any expense in trying to take her down, though. I've gotten the best lawyer I can afford to make sure I get a clean break to continue my life. It's just that the custody hearing was much more important to me. That was a messy and emotional affair. I brought in every bit of evidence I had against her to prove that she was an unfit parent. The surveillance video, the mall security's incident report, which proved that she'd lied about where she'd been, and witness statements. I also included the police report from when she'd shown up screaming at Ben's house. It felt strange. I'd loved this woman so much just a while ago, and now I was doing my best to destroy her reputation in court. It was brutal. I told myself that I was only doing what was best for Eric, but honestly, I kind of enjoyed it. She deserved it for what she'd done to us. What hurts the most is what this will do to Eric. I won full custody and she got supervised visitation rights, with the possibility of unsupervised visits in the future. But it doesn't feel like a real win because Eric is confused. How do you explain to a 4-year-old why mom and dad are not living together anymore and why he only gets to see her a few times a week? His questions get harder and harder to answer each week, and he's realizing that something is wrong. I hate her for exposing my son to danger, but I hate her even more for the sadness she's put him through by destroying our family. But I don't regret the way I handled things. Unlike with her, Eric and his safety will always be my number one priority, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep him safe from anyone trying to harm him, even if it is his own mother. Ben has been a real help to me throughout everything. Eric has even started calling him Uncle Ben, and honestly, he's earned the title. He gave us a place to stay when we needed to get away from Linda, and he never complained once. When we moved out to a new apartment, Ben helped us move and made sure to keep checking in once in a while. He claimed it was for Eric, but I knew he was just trying to make things easy for both of us. Never underestimate how much it can mean to have good support in your corner. Linda is still in both our lives to a degree, but I'm doing my best to move on. At most, we're both Eric's parents. That's the only relationship I'll have with her. I'll do my best to stay civil with her, but that's the very most she can expect from me. Apart from that, I've moved on from that cheating slut, and I'll always do my best to keep her from harming Eric in any more ways than she already has. It's one thing to suspect your partner is lying, but another to literally see the proof, with your son sitting alone in a parking lot while she disappears into some guy's truck for nearly an hour. You have every right to feel the way that you do. And then to have her turn around and threaten to call the cops on you for kidnapping? That's straight up unhinged. Honestly, it sounds like she was spiraling because she knew she'd been caught and didn't have any real defense. So she tried to flip the script. You did exactly what any decent parent would have done. Put your son first, stayed calm, and made moves to keep him safe. What would you have done? And thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time.